It was a quiet night, the kind where you feel safe and tucked in, drifting off into a peaceful sleep. But sometimes, the quietest moments hold the most unexpected twists. That's exactly what happened to me. I never could have predicted what was about to unfold when I closed my eyes that evening. You see, I thought everything was fine, my family, my life, my marriage. But as I lay there, drifting off to sleep, something happened that completely shattered the sense of normalcy I had grown so used to. It started when I felt a tap on my shoulder. At first, I thought it was just a part of the dream, but the tap came again, more insistent this time. Groggily, I opened my eyes, only to find my son standing there in the dim light of the room. He looked confused, maybe even a little scared. Now, let me give you a little context. My son is only 10, and he's never done anything like this before. Normally, he's in his room, sound asleep by the time I hit the pillow. So, seeing him there, especially at that hour, sent a chill through me. Something didn't feel right. "Mom, are you okay?" he whispered, his voice tremoring. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake, trying to understand why he was there. But then, the look in his eyes made my heart drop. It wasn't just the typical concern you'd expect from a child. It was as if he had seen something he shouldn't have, something that deeply unsettled him. Before I could ask him what was wrong, my mind started racing with 100 different possibilities. Could it be that he had heard something? Or worse, had he witnessed something that would change how he saw our family forever? Now, here's where it gets complicated. This wasn't just a random middle-of-the-night visit. My son's appearance in my room wasn't the only shock I was about to face that night. You see, earlier that evening, I discovered something about my husband that completely turned my world upside down. I had found something, something that made me question everything. It was so devastating, I didn't know whether to confront him or keep it to myself and figure it out later. But now, with my son standing in front of me, I was faced with an even bigger dilemma. What had he seen? Why was he up so late? And, most importantly, how was I going to handle the truth that I was about to face, not only with my husband, but with my son as well? You won't believe what happened next, but that's a story for another time. Stick around as I dive into what really went down, how my family's secrets started unraveling, and how that night changed everything for us all. Trust me, you don't want to miss the rest of this. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My son's face was pale, and his eyes were wide, like he had just witnessed something that left him speechless. I tried to calm him down, but there was a noticeable hesitation in my voice, a nervousness I couldn't hide. I asked him again, "What's wrong, sweetie? Why are you in here?" He took a deep breath and looked away, almost as if he were gathering his thoughts. It was so unlike him. My son was usually the kind of kid who would burst into my room with questions or excitement, not someone who seemed so lost and troubled. I reached for him, pulling him close, trying to comfort him in the way I always had. But that didn't seem to help much. He gently pulled away, then whispered, I heard, I heard something. At first, I thought he was talking about a noise from outside or something in the house. But as he started to explain, I realized the situation was much more complex than that. His words were fragmented, shaky, like he wasn't sure how to express what he had witnessed. But from the fragments, I could gather one thing. He had seen something that had happened earlier that night, something that made him feel deeply uncomfortable. I was beginning to panic. My mind raced back to what I had found earlier that evening. When I had stumbled across my husband's phone left carelessly on the kitchen counter, I had never expected what I was about to uncover. I wasn't snooping. I swear I wasn't. But in that moment, I had opened the message threads by accident. I never thought it would lead to something so devastating. The texts were unmistakable, and the pictures, well, they spoke for themselves. The worst part? I had no idea how long this had been going on. The betrayal felt like a slap in the face. My husband, the man I thought I could trust, had been hiding something from me for who knows how long. And now, with my son standing in my room, there was a heavy feeling in the air. Was he talking about the same thing? Could he have somehow sensed the tension that was building, even though I hadn't said a word to him? I tried to focus on him again, asking if he was okay, trying to calm him down. But the more I listened, the more I realized that I wasn't the only one in our family grappling with secrets. What did my son hear? What did he know? And how could I protect him from the fallout of everything that was about to explode? As my mind raced, I had to fight the urge to run and confront my husband right then and there. But with my son in front of me, I knew I couldn't just make a rash decision. I needed to figure out the truth. But what truth? Would it break me even more to uncover what had been going on behind my back? Or was I already facing the worst of it? As my son stood there, still holding on to me with an unsettling grip, I couldn't help but wonder how much he truly understood. Was he aware of the gravity of what had happened? Or was he simply caught in the middle of something he couldn't yet fully comprehend? His innocent confusion only made things worse. I couldn't figure out whether I should shelter him from the truth or prepare him for a reality that, as a parent, I never wanted him to face. I sat him down on the bed, trying to gather my thoughts, but my mind was spiraling in 1,000 directions. The shock of what I had seen on my husband's phone still lingered in my mind, a constant nagging reminder that something had been terribly wrong for longer than I could imagine. My husband, the man I had built my life with, had not only been hiding something, but he had also left me vulnerable, vulnerable in ways I had never imagined. The texts, the calls, everything seemed to point to a secret life I had never even considered. How could I have been so blind? And yet, as I sat there with my son, the deeper conflict began to emerge. Should I confront my husband about what I found? Should I let it all unfold and risk destroying everything we had built together? Or should I keep quiet, pretend like nothing had changed, and try to protect my son from the inevitable fallout? But even as I wondered what to do next, I could feel my son's unease growing. He hadn't said much more, but the way he kept glancing toward the door told me he wasn't ready to talk yet. Had he seen something else? Had he overheard my conversations? I needed to know, but how could I ask him without making everything worse? And then there was the one question I couldn't ignore. Was I strong enough to face whatever lay ahead, no matter how painful or messy? The tension was unbearable, and I knew that whatever came next, it would change our family forever. But in that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat louder than the last. My mind was on overdrive, running through all the possibilities of what could happen next. The more I tried to make sense of it, the more tangled everything became. The unease in my son's eyes didn't help either. There was a heaviness in the room now, as if the air itself had thickened, weighed down by the unspoken truth between us. I needed answers, but asking my son felt impossible. His silence, his sudden withdrawal, he wasn't acting like his usual self. Whatever he had seen or heard was clearly affecting him, and I had no idea how deep it ran. I couldn't help but wonder if he was the key to unlocking everything, yet the more I tried to pull him into conversation, the more distant he seemed. I looked at him again, this time trying to hide my panic. Sweetie, I need you to tell me what you saw. It's important. Please, just tell me. He shook his head, looking like he was about to cry. I, I can't, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I wanted to press further, but the last thing I wanted was to push him past his breaking point. My mind snapped back to my husband. Should I confront him now, when I wasn't even sure how to approach this situation with my son still in the room? Could I really face him without knowing how deep the betrayal ran? Then, as I sat there in the quiet, something in me snapped. I couldn't keep running from the truth. I had to confront my husband, but what would I say? What would I even do when I came face to face with him? Just as I started to stand up, I heard a noise at the door. Someone was coming down the hallway. My stomach dropped. It was him, my husband, and I had no idea what would happen next. Would I confront him now, or would I keep holding it all inside, waiting for the storm to break over us all? I froze when I heard the footsteps approaching the door. My heart raced even faster, and I looked at my son, who was still sitting on the bed, his face pale, his hands tightly clutching the edge of the blankets. I couldn't tell if he was more terrified of what was about to happen or of something else entirely. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck, and before I could make a decision, the door creaked open. It wasn't my husband. I blinked, confused. Standing in the doorway was my daughter, my eldest, who had been away at a friend's house for the weekend. She looked at me with wide eyes, then at my son, and there was a moment of silence. The air between us was thick with tension. I, uh, I heard voices, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And I thought I should check on you guys. She glanced quickly at my son, and I could see something flash in her eyes. It was that knowing look, that same look my son had given me earlier, the one that suggested something was terribly wrong. For a split second, I almost felt relief. Maybe this was the sign that I could keep everything under control, that maybe I wouldn't have to face the storm alone. But then I noticed it, the phone in her hand. It wasn't her phone, it was my husband's. My stomach dropped. She wasn't just checking on us. She was holding something I hadn't seen in hours, the very same phone I had found earlier, the one that had opened up a whole new world of betrayal. My first instinct was to demand an explanation, but the words stuck in my throat. I couldn't ask her what I desperately needed to know. I couldn't force her to say anything when she looked so uneasy, almost apologetic. "Why do you have Dad's phone?" I asked, my voice sounding more strained than I intended. She looked away quickly, her cheeks turning pink. I I was just trying to get a message from him. He's been acting weird lately. I thought he might need something." Her voice trailed off, and I could see the panic building behind her eyes. The tension in the room doubled, and I felt a pit form in my stomach. This was not a coincidence. Something bigger was happening here, and suddenly, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss of unanswered questions. What was going on with my husband? What had my daughter seen? And how deep did this go? The stakes were higher now, much higher. My family was unraveling faster than I could keep up with, and I had no idea who I could trust. The tension in the room felt unbearable, my heart pounding in my chest as I stood there, staring at my daughter holding my husband's phone. My mind was spinning with 100 different thoughts, but all I could focus on was the fact that this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding anymore. This was much bigger, and suddenly I couldn't hold back any longer. "Give me the phone," I said, my voice firm, though I could hear the shakiness creeping in. She hesitated for a moment, clearly struggling with something. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the same way I had seen it in my son's. They knew something, but neither of them seemed ready to speak it out loud. I reached for the phone, my hands shaking, and finally she handed it to me. I unlocked it, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through the messages. As I read through the threads, the world around me seemed to stop. There was no denying it now. The truth hit me like a punch in the gut. My husband had been talking to someone who I didn't recognize, someone he had been planning to meet, someone he had been lying to me about for months. The conversations weren't just casual, they were detailed, intimate, and the worst part? My daughter had seen these same messages before, but hadn't known how to tell me. Mom, she whispered, I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't know how to say it, but I saw the texts too. Her voice cracked, and I realized just how much she had been holding in. I felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and disbelief at my husband, at myself, and at the situation I had allowed to grow so out of control. But before I could even react, a sudden voice came from the doorway. Is everything okay? My husband was standing there, looking at all of us with a mix of confusion and guilt. He wasn't expecting any of this. Not now, not like this. I took a deep breath, standing tall. No, it's not okay. Not by a long shot. For a moment, everything felt like it was in slow motion, but the real shock came when my son finally spoke up, his voice steady but firm. I heard everything, Mom. I saw you looking through Dad's phone. I saw the messages, too. I turned toward him, stunned. The weight of his words hit me harder than anything. He wasn't just an innocent bystander. He had known, in his own way, all along. Then, in a final twist, my husband's face changed. It's not what you think, he said, his voice quiet but desperate. I wasn't hiding anything from you. Not in the way you think. Before I could ask what he meant, he pulled out a letter from his pocket. My heart skipped a beat as he handed it to me. This is why I've been distant. It's not about her. It's about me. I've been trying to tell you the truth, but I didn't know how to. The letter was addressed to me from his doctor, explaining that he had been dealing with some serious health issues that he hadn't wanted to burden me with. The message wasn't about betrayal. It was about him trying to protect me from his own fears. I stood there holding the letter in my hands, my emotions tangled in knots. But just as I thought I might understand the whole story, I saw it, the final, unexpected detail at the bottom of the letter, a note about an upcoming surgery, one he hadn't told me about, and the surgeon's name? The same person he had been texting all along. The truth wasn't as simple as I'd thought, and it was clear now that there was more to unravel. But for the first time in a long time, I realized the story wasn't over. The real questions were only just beginning. As Sarah stepped out of the house, the wind carried a fresh promise of change. She could feel the heaviness of the past slowly lifting, leaving room for something brighter. Tom, walking beside her, seemed to share the same sense of peace. They had come a long way, both physically and emotionally, and the challenges they had faced together had shaped them into something stronger than they had ever imagined. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Sarah wasn't afraid. She had learned the hard way that no matter how twisted the path, it could always lead to something better if you stayed true to yourself. Tom had shown her that love and trust weren't just words. They were choices you made, even when it seemed impossible. And through it all, she had found a sense of hope she thought had been lost forever. As they reached the edge of town, they paused. Sarah looked back at the house, now quiet and still, its mysteries and secrets buried in the past. It had once been a place of fear and sorrow, but now it felt like a chapter that had closed, leaving behind the kind of peace that could only come from acceptance. She had let go of the anger and regret that had clouded her heart for so long. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Turning toward the open road ahead, Sarah smiled at Tom. There was no rush now, no need to hurry. The future, with all its unknowns, was waiting for them. But for the first time, it felt full of possibilities. They had learned the importance of patience, of letting go of what couldn't be changed, and of embracing the beauty of starting over. The town, once a place of shadows, now seemed full of promise. Sarah realized that sometimes the hardest battles led to the most profound transformations. She was no longer the person she had been when she first arrived. Scared, lost, unsure. She was stronger now, more aware of what truly mattered in life. And as she took Tom's hand, ready to face whatever came next, she knew she could handle anything. Together, they would continue moving forward, building a future that reflected the lessons learned along the way. The storm had passed, and the sun was finally shining, and with it came the certainty that whatever lay ahead, it would be worth the journey.